Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on reading and empathy, enriching readers' experiences and outcomes. I'm Becky, I'm the Chief Exec of the English Association, and I'm really pleased to be here with you this afternoon. The English Association is a learned society and subject association, which was founded in 1906 to promote, support, and celebrate the discipline of English studies. And we cover all stages of education, from primary and early years through to secondary and further education, to higher education and beyond. And we cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature, and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you ever so much to Sarah McEwen and Sarah Mears, who will both introduce themselves properly in a moment. Our members also make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. So if you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. Membership starts at just £29 and enables you to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. Okay, it's now my great pleasure to hand over to Sarah McEwen to kick us off this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I'll just start by sharing my screen. Perfect. So hopefully you're all able to see this okay. Oop. Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining us today at the end of what's perhaps quite a busy day for everyone. I'll just introduce myself briefly first, and then I'll pass over to Sarah Mears. My name is Sarah McEwen. I'm a Professor of Literacy. I'm based within the Literacy Lab at the University of Edinburgh, and I have a specific focus on understanding children and young people's reading experiences and outcomes. And I'm delighted today to share some of the research that we've been carrying out, looking at the relationship between reading and empathy. And this research has been led by a colleague of mine, Elena Santi. So I'll pass over to Sarah now to introduce herself.
Thanks, Sarah. You'll hear a lot of thank you, Sarah. Next slide, Sarah. So on today, I'm Sarah Mears. I'm a librarian. I work, and my day job is for Libraries Connected, which is a national charity, but I'm also the chair and co-founder of Empathy Lab, which is a third sector organisation which is dedicated to promoting the proven power of empathy to change children's lives. And uniquely, we focus on reading and stories and literature as the tool that helps children develop the empathy skills they will need to thrive. So really excited to be here today with the other Sarah.
Thank you. So just to give an overview of what we plan to cover, we'll talk first of all about empathy and what we mean by empathy as a concept. We'll then talk about some of the theoretical and empirical research, which has looked at the relationship between reading and empathy, before sharing one of my own research studies, as I said, led by Elena, which looked at young people, that is teenagers, reflections on the relationship between how fiction book reading supports their empathy. And finally, Sarah will finish up by sharing some of the work from the Empathy Lab and provision and practice to nurture empathy. So in terms of what we mean by the concept of empathy, empathy is known to be a multidimensional concept, so 3 different dimensions, albeit interconnected. The first that we can think about is cognitive empathy. This is our ability to understand others' perspectives, to be able to infer their cognitive or emotional states. In other words, to be able to understand another person's thoughts, their feelings, and their points of view as well. When we think of affective empathy, we think more about the sharing of others' emotional responses and experiences. So, for example, our ability to physically or emotionally experience the emotions of another person. I mean, while behavioural empathy looks at behaviours or actions resulting from this sort of internal experience of cognitive or affective empathy. So within this, we can think about pro-social behaviours resulting from cognitive or affective empathy, which may result in, for example, physical or verbal actions, positive actions towards others. And as I said, there has been some, albeit quite limited research looking at the relationship between reading and empathy. Keith Oatley, about a decade ago, spoke about fiction books as reflecting the social world that we live in, and fiction being a simulation of the social world. And in some of our own research, we talk about the potential for fiction books to expand our life experiences and to give us insight into people, cultures, places that we wouldn't experience otherwise. And there's also been some really interesting work looking at different types of narrative as well. And what sets fiction books apart from TV and film is that books offer greater opportunities for insight into inner worlds, for example, internal thoughts or feelings of characters. But in addition to this, as we read, we often read at a slower pace, or we control the pace of reading. And so it gives more opportunities for personal reflection as we maybe read and reflect on background knowledge that we have or personal experience that we have and how that may relate to the book, and which can be quite different from how we view or experience TV or film. In terms of some of the empirical work, so Raymond Marr and colleagues have looked at the relationship between social cognition, that is our ability to perceive, interpret, or respond to social information, and fiction book reading. And this research has been carried out primarily with adults. But what they have found is that there is a relationship between our social cognition skills and our fiction book reading. And work by Jennifer Barnes has looked at the relationship between fiction reading and empathy, and argues that it's not due to only what is read, but also how one reads as well. And that's something that we're really interested in at the Literacy Lab, is around kind of readers' dispositions, but also the ways in which they read and how this can enhance their reading experiences. So today I'm going to be sharing the results from one of our recent publications. This was looking at the relationship between reading and empathy and seeking to expand understanding of the different ways in which fiction books can potentially support empathy. And we were really centering young people's, that is teenagers' perspectives and experiences within this study. This article is based on individual interviews with 37 young people aged between 12 to 14. 27 of these young people were teenagers. 23 of them were white British, with 14 others self-reporting other ethnicities, including African, Indian, Chinese, and Pakistani, and 7 of these students having English as an additional language. Now, in order to take part in the study, they had to be self-described as avid readers of fiction. In other words, they had to choose to read fiction in their own time to be able to reflect on the different ways in which fiction reading could support their empathy and understanding of others. So this is not necessarily reflective of the general population. As we know, there are continued declines in the number of children and young people who do choose to read and who report enjoying reading. But we know that for young people who do choose to read in their own time and enjoy reading fiction, these are some of the benefits, some of the empathy benefits that might be gained. Now, as a result of these individual interviews, we carried out a process which is known as thematic analysis. And this is just a process whereby we aim to identify some of the key themes that are coming up within the data. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is empathizing with fictional characters and the extent to which fiction books provide opportunities to support both cognitive and affective empathy. I'll then talk about this experience of like transferring beyond fiction, so not just empathizing with fictional characters, but actually transferring this to the real world too, and how it can support our understanding of both known and unknown others within our lives. I'll then talk about the potential for fiction books to support with personal enrichment and social relationships, and then talk more about the characteristics of the book themselves and how they were able to facilitate empathy through transporting young people into the fictional world. What I hope to do today is really centre the voices of young people. So what I'll be doing is providing quotes and giving you an opportunity to read these, and then just talking a little around each. So as I said, the first theme that came up was the potential for fiction books to support our empathy for fictional characters. And here are just a couple of quotes which exemplify the idea of cognitive empathy. And I'll just give you an opportunity to read through these yourself. So just to say, in relation to this first quote, what the young person really is describing here is a sort of recognition of maybe a shared experience around something. And there's been a lot of research over the last decade looking at the representation of different types of characters, often racially minoritized characters or characters with disability. But I think it's also important that we think about the representation of experience too, and actually being able to see fictional characters who've maybe had shared experiences with ourselves can not only support with empathy, empathy, but can also support with our own kind of identity development. And we know that for individuals from minority or marginalized groups, sometimes being able to see their own experiences reflected in books that they read can also support with a positive sense of self and sense of belonging, in addition to having potential to support empathy. So this first quote really is about sort of recognizing this experience and being able to see things from another person's perspective because of that. And the second quote is really about an example where there's not a sort of known experience. And as I've said in our own research and others as well, they talk about the potential for books to help us to sort of expand our life experiences and have insights into the types of things that might be going on within other people's minds. Okay, I'm now going to share a couple of quotes in relation to effective empathy. Okay. So when we think about the emotions elicited by books and reading, often embarrassment isn't the first one that we think of. And through this study, but also through a whole range of other studies, we've been really interested in the richness and diversity of emotional experiences that can come through reading books. And this may be things such as feelings of happiness, of enjoyment, of curiosity, but also unsettling emotions such as feelings of sadness or distress, in addition to feelings of comfort and nostalgia. And a colleague of mine, Samina Patur, has recently introduced me to a concept known as emodiversity. And this is basically the kind of the variety and of abundance of richness of emotions that we can experience, and actually how it can be really beneficial to have this kind of rich range of emotional experiences. So I'm really interested in the potential for fiction books to be able to do this. And then in terms of the second quote, you can see an example here of someone talking about how a book has made them feel both sad and both happy as well. But what they talk about here is feeling really close to the characters too. And actually, in some of our own research, we hear children talking about having fictional friends in the books that they read or feeling a sense of connection with characters too. So effective empathy can be felt through feeling close to a fictional character, but also just through sort of recognizing a similar situation to a character in their own life. Okay, so I'm now going to move beyond sort of empathizing with fictional characters and talk about how fiction books can foster empathizing with real life others. And in our research, we identified examples of both known and unknown others. So this is an example of a known other, and I'll just allow you to read this now. And I think or hope what you can see here is evidence of sort of perhaps pro-social behaviour, or at least kind of positive intended actions towards others. In other words, wanting to understand someone more, or perhaps being kinder to someone during a difficult time in their life. They also make reference to Batman here as well. And although a lot of our work has looked at fiction books, I also think it's very likely that comics, magazines, graphic novels can similarly support with empathy. I think it's more to do with the sense of connection or resonance that a child or young person may feel to the content of the story and the characters within the story. And then, of course, we also saw examples of transferring for fiction to unknown others too. And again, I'll just give you an opportunity to read this. And here this child or this young person is talking about perhaps being able to better understand depression, social anxiety, self-harm, bullying as well. And they're referring here to fact fictions. Now, at the moment, I'm actually personally going through a year of non-fiction reading. So I'm only reading non-fiction for the entire year. And one of the things, and whenever I say this, people are absolutely horrified. But actually what I'm learning through a sort of wide range of non-fiction, whether it's memoir, biography, autobiography, but also other types of non-fiction as well, is this real opportunity to sort of gain insight to other people, to start to care about other people as well. And so I think it's important to recognize that it might not just be fiction that can support our empathy, but actually non-fiction and different types of non-fiction too. Okay. In addition to empathizing with others, that is empathizing with characters or extending this to the real world, young people also gave examples of empathy, but spoke about how these were perhaps personally enriching to themselves. And again, I'll just give you a chance to read through this. And so what we're seeing here is an example of a young person who is perhaps becoming more self-aware of maybe how they had behaved in the past, and actually through reading books they've been able to kind of reflect a little bit on their own behaviours. And through this project, but also through a number of other projects, we've been looking at the relationship between reading and personal enrichment, and the potential for books to support intellectual, social and emotional enrichment, in addition to simply being beneficial in terms of education or language or literacy outcomes. And beyond personal enrichment, there's also the potential for books to support with social relationships as well, through demonstrating or developing a better understanding of other people and perhaps acting slightly differently as a result, as this quote will illustrate. Okay. So again, perhaps maybe recognizing that they don't always get things right, but actually perhaps they feel like they're getting better, and it can have a positive effect on their social relationships. And finally, moving beyond the readers themselves, thinking more about the text and actually what it is about the book, whether it's in terms of the story events, the content, or the quality of the writing, and the potential for the authors to sort of take them on a journey or immerse them within the story, and the ways in which this can support their empathy. And so again, here are just 3 different quotes now, and really exemplifying this. And I think what this really illustrates is that there's this sort of interaction between the text or the book and the young person themselves, and the level of engagement and the quality of the quality and richness, I suppose, of the characters and the story, and how these can really enhance or support feelings of empathy. Okay. So in terms of, to summarise, as I've said at the beginning, we worked with, Elena interviewed 37 young people who all self-reported as being avid readers of fiction. And we asked them all to give examples of how reading has supported their empathy beforehand. But actually, of the 37 that we interviewed, only 16 were able to give examples of this. And these are some of the quotes that we saw there. Now, there are a number of different interpretations of this. First of all, it can be quite difficult for us to recall to mind an example of where reading has supported our feelings of empathy. But I also think it's important to recognise that these were young people talking about their volitional reading practices, so the reading that they chose to do in their own time. And in this project and in other projects as well, we find that during the teenage years, there are lots of different reasons that teenagers choose to read. The teenage years are associated with identity development, as teenagers are trying to make sense of themselves and their place within the world. And we know that some people read in order to understand themselves better, not necessarily to understand others. We know that other people read, for example, to pursue their interests, to support with future aspirations, to escape from reality, to laugh. There's lots of different reasons why they choose to read. And so empathy is one, but maybe not the main reason that a young person does read. And so if we want to think about the ways in which book reading can foster empathy, we maybe need to kind of set up classroom practices in order to support with this. And one of the papers that I'd like you to draw your attention to is the paper by Shrivers et al., which was published in 2019. And this was a systematic review of empirical studies, so experimental and quasi-experimental studies, which had looked at school-based practices, literature practices to foster insight into human nature. So not just empathy, but understanding of human nature more broadly. And what they found was that there were sort of 3 different design principles underpinning these classroom-based practices. The first was text selection or book selection, and I think Sarah Beers is going to be giving lots of great examples of that in just a minute. The second was encouraging young people to recall and reflect on personal life experiences and their reading experiences as well. And then another was about sharing these experiences through others in terms of discussion too. So a lot of our work really focuses on that kind of individual aspect of reading. And actually, I think through discussion with others, there's a potential to kind of expand the benefits of fiction reading and how it can support empathy. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Sarah Mears now, who's going to be sharing some of the brilliant work that they're doing with the Empathy Lab. And I know there's lots of different book suggestions too, so I'm really excited to see these.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. So Empathy Lab works with schools, school libraries and public libraries, and we run a schools program and an annual Empathy Day festival. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about that at the end. And every year we curate a Read for Empathy book collection with 70 titles assessed against our empathy criteria. And across the year we work with authors, illustrators and publishers, and we've been absolutely fascinated by the neuroscience underpinning the development of empathy. We learned, as Sarah said, when you read and feel really transported into a story and connect with the characters, the empathy you feel can be transferred to real life situations. If you go to the next slide, please, Sarah. So we've been working with the University of Sussex. So just another little piece of research for you. And this research that they did was longitudinal and funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. And they really wanted to look at whether reading could help children become more empathetic and whether empathy can support children in becoming better readers. So the key findings it said there were that empathy and reading ability grow together over time. I suppose there's no real surprise there, but what is a surprise is that the research hasn't happened before. So this was with primary age children as well. So it's beginning to really build our evidence base that reading and empathy are really importantly inextricably linked as well. So they found that children who are better at understanding others' emotions become stronger readers. The research looked at cognitive empathy, the ability, as Sarah said, to recognise and understand other people's feelings, and affective empathy, which involves sharing others' emotions, and how the two elements of reading ability, how accurately children read, and engagement, how they are motivated to read, can work together. They found that children with stronger reading skills have higher cognitive empathy later on. Children who are better at understanding other people's emotions tended to get to be stronger readers as they grew older, and that reading ability was also linked to affective empathy, so better readers could share others' emotions more easily. And children who are more empathetic, measured against an empathy scale, showed greater engagement reading later on. So there was that kind of constant toing and froing between reading and empathy. The more you read, the more empathetic you are. The more empathetic you are, the more you want to read. So what the lesson it gave us was that we've got to keep exposing our children to the wonderful range of books that will really tempt them into reading because it has so many beneficial effects. Interestingly for us as Empathy Lab as well, when children were encouraged specifically to pay attention to children's characters' feelings and emotions, their cognitive empathy was found to improve more than just asking them to read alone. And also that discussing stories with peers helped children reflect deeply on characters' experiences and improved their broader ability to recognise emotions in real life. So it's not just giving a child a book and telling them to get on with it. It's actually that whole engagement around reading, book talking, all those kind of activities that really stimulate children's interest in characters that can deepen their empathy skills. So next slide, please. This is just a quote from one of the researchers, and she said, boosting empathy through reading is not just about practicing a skill. It's about providing children with meaningful, emotionally rich experiences with stories and supporting them in thinking about feelings, relationships, and human behaviour. So it's really important that interaction with children around books. If you could skip the next couple of slides, please, Sarah, and I'll come back to those in a little while. That's lovely. Next one. That's it. So, as Sarah mentioned, every year we publish a Read for Empathy collection, usually around 70 books, 65 to 70 books. We divide them into a primary collection and a secondary collection, and we've put guides to each of the collections on our website. We are just at the start of reading for the 2027 common collection. So publishers submit their titles to us and we read them against empathy criteria. So next slide, please, Sarah. So this is the full 2026 collection. You may recognise some of the titles. There's a mixture there of the primary and the secondary collection. And again, you can find the guides to these on the Empathy Lab website, so you'll be able to see them in more detail. But I'm going to introduce you to some of the characters in a little while. Next slide, please. So this is why it's important. So Sonia Thompson, who's a head teacher in Birmingham, and she's one of our Read for Empathy judges, helping us select the collection, said, teaching children to be empathetic should be a right, not a privilege. And if we do it well, through the power of beautiful books like these, we have the potential to actually change lives now and into the future. And Kate Wilson, who's the CEO of Nosy Crow, one of the publishers, said, the collection is an essential resource that proves empathy can be learned and nurtured, and that stories are one of the most powerful tools we have for building a more compassionate society. So next slide, please, Sarah. So these are our submission criteria. We're looking at excellence. We want to know that there are quality books, excellence writing, excellence of illustration. We particularly are looking at the quality of characterization. We want to know that it's authentic. We want authors who've actually had lived experience, or we know that they've had particularly in-depth research. But we're also looking at how well the books represent our diverse communities, how they challenge tribal thinking and promote understanding, how they support our key empathy skills. So things like perspective taking, being able to see through the eyes of different characters' points of view, emotion recognition and vocabulary, and empathic communication and social action, actually doing something as a result of those feelings of empathy. But we're also looking at books that explore some of the social issues of today, such as refugees or homelessness, things that children will be exposed to every day. And next slide, please, Sarah. So, yeah, I wanted to introduce you to some of the characters that you're going to meet if you delve into our collection. I focused on the secondary collection for these, but you'll see some of the primary books as we go through too. So on this slide, you will meet Reese, Ellie, and Stephen and Danny. So I don't know if you know any of these books, but I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about them. So The Boy I Love by William Hussey is, I think, I don't know if you're allowed to have favourites. You probably are once you've actually launched the collection, but I think it was definitely my favourite book that I read in the collection. It's absolutely beautifully written. It's set in the First World War, and it's about a subject I knew nothing about, which is homosexuality during the First World War. A teenage captain and a teenage sergeant just fall in love, and the contrast between the horrors of war, this beautiful love story, but also the fact that the captain is actually decorated, and yet because he loves another man, he's actually condemned for that. And so all these contrasts through the book are just so beautifully handled. I think it's a fabulous read, so I would recommend that. And that's aimed at the older end of the sort of teenage age range. But right at the other end is Jelly Bean, which is a novella, really, a very short book by Eve Ainsworth about Ellie, who wakes up one morning and just cannot go to school. Her anxiety is so high, she just physically cannot go to school. And I think it's the best book I've ever read around that kind of school anxiety from the young person's point of view. You really understand what they're going through, but also how the adults around them are just like, oh, surely if she just went to school, she'd be fine once she got there. And they don't understand. And yet from this beautifully written book, we really get a sense about what it would feel like to be Ellie. A really, really interesting read. And the other one that's on there is On the Edge, which is about Reese, who is a champion surfer in Devon, but who is also bereaved. His mother has died. And it's about how he kind of spirals out of control, really. And it's about what happens in his life to just bring him back. He, gets in with the wrong crowd. And at the heart of this book is a boy who just really needs some love in his life, and again, a really powerful read. So next slide, please. So I just thought I'd also share a couple more of the themes through that were running through this collection this year. So refugees, I would just like to highlight particularly My Name is Samin and Phoenix Brothers, which are in the secondary collection. But also there are some wonderful picture books in the primary collection, like The Endless Sea, which is about a journey, The Bicycle about a refugee girl and someone who's just kind to her, and Noah's New Home about settling into a new home. They're all stories written by people who really understand the refugee situation, or in fact who have been refugees themselves. And so they have a real authenticity about them and a power about them to understand what it's actually like to be torn from your family and to have to come to a new country where you're actually not always as welcomed as you should be. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then identity is, as you'd appreciate, always a really interesting part of the collection. And I really liked some of the books in this year's collection. So just to highlight to you, Elliot, non-binary identity in Kickflip, who just finds a tribe around skateboarding. And it's a graphic novel. It's a brilliant graphic novel. It's volume one. So I think there's more to come from finding out more about Elliot as we go through. And I also love The Brightest Star, which is a real transition book. The first story was set around Stevie when she was just going to secondary school. This is a second in a series, focusing on Stevie, who is identifying as gay, and Andrew, her friend, who just doesn't know who he is yet. And it's about him trying to find his identity. And the other one I wanted to just highlight is the Wish You Were Her by the brilliant Elle McNichol, who I'm sure most of you know wrote A Kind of Spark. This is a really interesting one because it's about a teenage film star. So she's a huge celebrity, is Allegra in this story. And but she's also neurodivergent, and she's just really struggling to cope with stardom. So it gives you really interesting insight into, everyone wants to be a star, but what does it really feel like? So some lovely books on there. I also like Loverbirds. If you're a fan of Liverpool, Liverpool is a character in this book. It's a fantastic book about two girls, their budding romance, and set in the city of Liverpool. So anyone who's a fan of Liverpool will enjoy that book. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then we have we're looking at a lot of books in the collections about racism and just persecution at the moment. Some fantastic books. So One Day by Michael Rosen, which is about the Holocaust. Zack and Jack, which is from a Welsh publisher, and two boys who just can't understand where their parents don't get on, and are horrified to find out about the racism that's going on in their community because they're just two friends and they don't understand. The middle two books there, Birdie is about a girl who's dual heritage in the 1940s, 50s. She's sent to she's in a children's home, but is sent to her aunt in a small mining village, and it's about the fact that it's a very homogenous village, all white, and suddenly she appears in the village, and it's the impact of her being in the village is really interesting. And again, a beautifully written book, wonderful story. And then Odd Girl Out is about a teenager who's come from Dubai to London, and just experiences horrific racism in her school, and it's how that's dealt with in the community. So again, some really brilliant books, both primary and secondary there. And next slide, please, Sarah. And then just a final one for this section about books, some books around the environment, because social action is a really important part of empathy. And in these books, there are opportunities for young people to experience or to see role models who are actually campaigning for issues that matter. And in this case, it's the environment. And just wanted to highlight The Boy in the Tree, which again is probably a book for those sort of key stage 2, key stage 3 young people, and it's about a boy whose family are splitting up, and he's really angry, but he finds his focus and his direction through campaigning for to save a tree, and well, he just does it because it really to be naughty and to protest about what's going on in his family, but he actually finds a real purpose in doing that. Again, a wonderful story. So those are just some of the books from this year's collection that we thought we'd introduce you to. There's also, I just should also mention Red Sky in the Morning, Alex Wharton, wonderful poetry around just the landscape as well to look for. But yeah, if you want to explore more, then do go onto our website. Because not only have we got the guides for 2026, we've got all the guides going back to the start of the when we started the collections in 2017. So next year will be our 10th. Well, this year is our 10th collection. So yeah, do go and have a look at those if you want to. But then next slide, please, Sarah. I'll be quick. So just finally, just wanted to let you know that the Empathy Day Festival is coming up fast. It's from the 4th to 11th of June. We have a festival every year, and this is really exciting this year. So we're going to be inviting everyone to take part and to jump into someone else's story, literally jump into someone else's story. So next slide, please, Sarah. So we have an amazing festival lineup. We're always really moved and touched by the, I suppose, the support we get from our wonderful authors and illustrators who are on our Read for Empathy collections and beyond, actually, who are listening to us. And I'm sure that you'll recognise some of the familiar faces on in that photo. If you could move on, Sarah, as well, please. So just what to expect, there is a QR code on the screen there. So if you want to register to take part, please do scan the QR code. But if you can't do that, then just go onto the Empathy Lab website and register there. You'll be able to access festival toolkits. There are a range of printable activities and films that you can start watching now, so you can prepare with your classes to watch them during the Empathy Day Festival, but you can have seen them in advance. So next slide, please. So there's all sorts of things that you can do. There are live events that you can sign up to. As you can see, there's a primary event on the 4th of June. There's a secondary event, which is actually on the 11th of June, and also the Friday Book Club, which is actually on Thursday the 11th of June, and you can sign up to that. And each of them has an amazing array of authors with them, like Louis Stowe and Jeffrey Boche and Matt Goodfellow and Manjeet Mann, and an amazing lineup with the Friday Book Club as well. So if you're interested in those, do go to the website and sign up for those, and you can watch them with your classes. And the next slide, please. There's also on-demand activities that you can watch when you need to. So Empathy Day assemblies. It's the 11th of June. Yeah, sorry about that typo. It's Empathy Day assemblies. There's a primary one and a secondary one. It was rather sort of secondary sort of Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 assembly. There's an Empathy Day assembly in Wales, and there's a Draw with Rob for all ages. And everyone loves the Draw with Rob. So yeah, you can watch those when you need to. And next slide, please. And then there are Spark Empathy events. These are short films that you can again watch. These are available to watch now, so you can prepare yourself to watch them with your classes. Events with brilliant authors designed to build empathy in all sorts of ways. So as you can see there, we've got people like Michael Rosen doing it, Nathaniel Lassaur, Rachel Bright, Patrice Lawrence, loads of different, and you'll see on the screen there that they are, you might not be able to read that, but if you can, they are identified for different key stages. And again, if you go onto the website, all the information will be on the website there. And one last little bit for you to do. So to take the empathy challenge, there are 9 empathy building activities that you can do either before the Empathy Day Festival, or you can start doing them now, or you can do them during the Empathy Day Festival, choosing your empathy reads, join the empathy book clubs in schools, choose your empathy character, create a character feeling file. What do they feel on the inside? What does it feel like on the outside? Make sure you make your empathy glasses, this year designed by the amazing Ramsey. And these glasses will help you see through the eyes of characters. That's what they're there for. There's a big lunch activity. So for the big lunch, we're joining forces with them and the National Year of Reading go all in for the big lunch. You have an empathy exchange. So one of our key empathy promotions is around communication and connection with other people. So to have a chat with people and find out about them. Make your empathy resolution, design an empathy comic strip to give to somebody else maybe, and also celebrate the good things in your community through empathy news. So all of that available on the Empathy Lab website, and we'd love you to take part and sign up for the toolkits. So I think we've got 5 minutes just for questions.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm just going to stop sharing my slides now, and if anyone has any questions, please put them into the chat. Oh, I'm sorry, Dean. I've just seen this now. Just to say that a copy of all of the slides will be available afterwards, in addition to recording of the presentation. So I'm very sorry that that those weren't accessible for you. Does anyone have any questions? I'm aware we have 3 minutes left. Okay, question from Valeria. Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think that although we talk about cognitive and affective empathy as being distinct, there's obviously connections between them. So if we think about the sort of cognitive skills that underpin empathy as well, so that cognitive skill, for example, the ability to make inferences, is necessary in order for us to see things from another person's perspective, but also in order to sort of share or understand the emotional experiences of another too. So I do think we've sort of been quite maybe quite quick to sort of say that there is differences between cognitive and affective empathy, when actually there are connections between them, and certainly cognitive processes which underpin our ability to empathize with others, whether in cognitive or emotional ways. I've got a question from Julia. I actually, and you will receive a link to the slides as well. I've just put a link there to the Shriver study that I spoke about, because it's an open access journal article, and that's the review of the interventions that I spoke of. So I think it's probably the most, that gives the sort of broadest range of literature within it.
Just scrolling through it, just how do we best tempt reluctant readers into reading for empathy? Can a class read work as well as individual reading? I'd say absolutely. I think because one of the important things for us around reading for empathy is that connection between people. So we always encourage like reading aloud, helping children, just letting children listen to the story, but adding into that the whole things around book talking. We often really love thinking about how we can make stories really creative by using sort of creative and immersive activities which allow children to just pause, hear the story, but then really step into the shoes of characters. So the more creative you can be using drama, using objects that children can hold and really experience what the characters are feeling in the story, the better really, in terms of really tempting, well, all children to engage with characters, but that will really kind of inspire reluctant readers who maybe just don't want to read a lot of text, but really want to talk and engage and, use all their senses to engage with the story.
I see an earlier question from Sarah Harmer about whether we included neurodivergent learner in our cohort. So I'm not sure if that's related to the project that I described, but in our research with young people, that Reading and Empathy project, we didn't actually get information from young people about whether or not they self-identified or have been diagnosed as being neurodivergent. But we have actually carried out a completely different research study with neurodivergent young people, that is young people who are autistic, ADHD or dyslexic, looking at their perspectives and experiences of seeing their own lives and reflected in what they read. And perhaps not surprising, they talk about the importance of sort of authentic and accurate representation of experience, not the sort of common single narrative for experience, but also recognizing the multifaceted and complex nature of their lives as well. So if you have a look on the Literacy Lab website, then there is some publications, but also some of our research which specifically focuses on understanding the perspectives and experiences of neurodivergent readers. Okay, there's just a link there. I'm aware it's 5:30 now, and I'm really sorry that we have not given enough time for questions. I'm just going to put my email address into the chat. So if anybody would like to follow up with a question afterwards, please feel free to get in touch with me. And I'm sorry that we've been unable to cover all your questions today.
Thank you so much to Sarah McEwen and Sarah Mears. It's been a real pleasure to listen in to you today. Thank you to everyone who has been here with us. I will share the slides and the links that were in the chat with you along with the recording later this week. So don't worry, you will have it all in your inbox. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.